am fairly well known on this channel for doing a lot of teardowns and deep dives into the electronics we not only use in FPV, but anything else I might be working on as well. Whilst doing that, I tend to use a lot of soldering irons, thermal cameras, and also microscopes. Now, today we're going to take a look at a new microscope that I've been sent from TOMLOV. This has a couple of very interesting features, including a built-in battery, but also autofocus as well. Now, in this video, I'm going to give you an overview of this, walk you through its features and capabilities, and then at the very end, share with you my thoughts. Before I do that, though, I just want to be crystal clear that they did reach out and send me this microscope over for free to take a look at. However, they have not paid me to make this video. They've not seen this video before it's been published. There are no affiliate links, and as always, my thoughts are entirely my own. Okay, now the version they've sent me here is the TM4K-AF FLEX. Now, as you can see on the front of the box, this is the version that has a stand that goes on the side of the desk with an arm that moves, and this is more suited for what I do here on the channel, electronic repair, inspection. This allows you to swing it in and out without it being in the way all of the time. There is also a version of this that has a more traditional base and microscope setup as well, but this is the one we're going to be taking a look at here today. Now, it comes in this quite big box that does weigh quite a bit, actually. If we have a look inside, we'll go through what we get first of all. So included is a set of instructions. We have a remote controller, a cleaning cloth. We have the microscope unit itself. Now, the unit is built into the display, so you've got your display and the microscope here. One really cool thing about this one, and I'm really looking forward to testing this, is the fact that this is autofocus. There are LEDs built into the bottom there as well, but it is fully autofocus, which means you don't have to mess around with the adjustment ring on the bottom. On the front then, we've got some controls, and then on the back, if we go around, we've got RIO, and we'll take a closer look at that in a minute. Under this, we will find a USB A to C, a HDMI cable. Okay. We have then a power adapter from the look of it, and it looks like it's a UK one. Yes, it is. UK style power adapter, rated up to 3 amp. We then over here have the stand and the rest of the stuff. So this is the stuff that adds the weight. So here we've got the flexible arm for the microscope. So there you can see that's the part that hinges in and out. We then have our desk mount. Oh wow, that is surprisingly heavy. So that's what a lot of the weight is in here. There we go. So you've got a desk mount for mounting that onto there. You've got a foam pad on the bottom there and a clamp and a nice big adjustment. Really quite thick. Nice quality on that, I have to say. We then have our vertical tube. Pop that down into there. We've got some other accessories. So there is our arm that mounts on the end of the other piece. We've got some bracketry. We've got our additional light that they have included with it as well. This is a mains LED light, so this isn't powered from the microscope itself. This has its own mains power. So whilst it does have LEDs built in, you have the additional LEDs there as well. We've got what looks to be a top plate for the stand. And then right in the bottom, you've got one of these rubber electronic repair pads. These are actually really good. I have a few of these around the place. These are really good for having on the bench when you're doing work. Okay, now just giving you a bit more of an overview of the main unit itself before we get into the assembly. Now, the microscope does look similar to other models, although the big difference here, as I've said already, is the fact that it does have autofocus and some buttons down here. Now, the main specification of this is as follows. With regards to the microscope part, it features an autofocus system, a 50 32 megapixel sensor with a resolution of 9600 by 5400. It also lists 13 megapixel spec as well, which is 4800 by 2696. I suspect, and I don't know for sure, that it might be one of these quad Bayer sensors that has that really high megapixel number, but the reality is it's more likely the 13 megapixel, but stills do come out at 9600 by 5400 in my tests. It features a 178 degree field of view on the bottom, and as I've said already, it has an autofocus lens fitted as standard. Now, it has a capability of up to 2000 times magnification with the 4 times digital zoom of that sensor. The display is an 8-inch IPS screen with a resolution of 1280 by 800. This isn't a 1080p or a 4K screen, but it's certainly good enough for looking at the microscope here, and we'll take a look at it in a bit more detail when we actually test it. Now, along the front, you can see we have our standard buttons. We've got our power and our controls. There is a little receiver here for infrared because they do include the remote controller. There's an indicator for power, and there's also this little area across here, and this is a touch bar that allows you to control the built-in microscope light. If I just flip it up, you can see that there's an LED ring included in the base there. That is actually controllable via this touch bar along here. Now, flipping it around to the back, you will see we have all of the I/O. So we have a mini HDMI output that supports a resolution of up to 1080p 60 frames a second. We have an SD card for recording for both stills and video directly from the unit. There is a USB port allowing you to connect it to your computer for live view output as well, and that supports resolutions of up to 4K 30 frames a second. It will also support 1080p 30 and 720p 60. And there's also a standard 5-volt USB voltage output on there as well. And there's a reset button in the middle. Now, one cool feature about this unit is the fact that it supports triple output. And what I mean by that is, because it also has this I/O here, you can not only display the image, but you can use all of these outputs at the same time. So you can have your 1280 by 800 display, your 1080p HDMI, and your 4K USB all working at the same time. So you can have it going into multiple other different types of devices. Just looking around the rest of it, down on the stem here, because it is autofocus, there's no adjustable focus ring here, but you do have some buttons for the focus system. So you've got an autofocus button, you've then got a plus and a minus for manually adjusting the focus, and then you've got some preset buttons that you can set preset focus positions on, and again, we'll take a look at that in use later on. Now, assembly on this looks fairly straightforward. They do include an Allen key in the kit, which is nice to see. In fact, there are 2. It looks like for the upright, there's a screw that came in the bottom of that, which I've just removed. So this has a screw hole and a locating pin there. So this looks fairly straightforward to assemble. I'm just going to start rotating it by hand, and then there's a locating hole like there that goes into. There we go. So that's now all assembled. I have to say, this is really strong. I can't overemphasize just how solid this is. Often when you get kits like this, and I bought a microscope kit a while ago, and the stand with it was, I'll use the word pathetic. This is nothing like this. This is really good, solid stuff, I have to say. So I have no concerns over the longevity of this and how long this is going to last on your desk. Now, what I'm going to do for the purpose of this video is mount it here, but I will be using it in a different location for the rest of my testing, but I do just want to sort of give you an idea of what that's like. That is absolutely solid. So next, we've got the arms. Now, there are 2 bits to this again, so we need to make sure we get this right. There is a screw-on piece here. And I just got to now have a quick look at which way round this goes on the manual. because I'm not following any instructions whilst doing this. I've now mounted this screw part onto this. Looking at the instructions, it goes up underneath from that L bracket, and then you screw that down on top, and then we should be able to mount that on there like that. And if I tighten that down, and then we've got the hinging assembly here, where all of this can articulate, allowing us to get it in the right position. And that gives you just an indication there of the kind of length that you've got from the arm on the side. It's giving you quite a nice big area underneath. Now, the final task will be to mount the microscope unit itself into the holder. That's fairly straightforward from the look of it. You just drop it down. There looks like there is a clamping section there. There we go, that we clamp it into, and we just put the screws in. And then what you can do is adjust this where you want it. So you do have some extra adjustment on that as well if you want it. But I'm just going to set that there, get that in the right place. And then make sure that that's nice and tight as well. And then I've got all that articulation on the arm there. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is just give you a bit of an overview of using the microscope before we get in and have a look at exactly what the imagery from it is like. Now, to power it up, we're going to press and hold the power button. It will kick in to its normal operating mode. And there underneath, you can see I've got a board showing. It is out of focus at the moment. I'm going to press the autofocus button on the front, and that will bring it into focus. You will also notice that it looks red, and that is because there are no lights on under the microscope at the moment. As I mentioned earlier, that there is LEDs built into that, and it is controlled with this bar along here. So for instance, if I tap up here, that will turn the LEDs on to maximum brightness, and you can see that under the scope. But what I can actually do is drag this bar up and down. It's a touch bar to adjust the brightness of the LEDs, or I can slide it all the way down to the bottom to turn it off, or tap it where I want it to allow me to get the amount of light that I need from underneath. Now, if the included LEDs that they have are not bright enough, you can also use that separate mains powered LED as well. We'll use that when we're looking at some more of the components later on. Now, with regards to the control on the microscope, everything's fairly straightforward. So on the front, we're currently up here showing that we're in still mode. If we want to swap modes, we simply press and hold the OK button, and that will then switch us into the camera recording mode with the onboard video recorder. If I press and hold again, this takes us into a third mode, and this is actually a mode that I really like. This, on the left-hand side of the screen, has the full-size image, and on the right-hand side of the screen, it has a zoomed-in image. So, for instance, you can see in the top corner here, it shows 2x zoom. What we can actually do, though, is go over the top of that IC, press, and we can zoom in up to 4 times on the digital zoom on this microscope. If I just pop that there and refocus a minute, and we'll just let it refocus on those components. There we go. You can see there that you can use this to get in a lot closer and have a look at exactly what you need to see. So we can get down to that resistor there. That didn't quite look straight on its pad, but it doesn't look too bad at all. Or we can even go down and start looking at the balls and the pads on this QFN IC. I really do like this mode. It's really handy for being able to see where you're going on the one side and what you want to get in looking closer at on the right hand side. There is then also another mode that allows you to split the screen into different modes as well, but the main operating modes are these two here. Now, with regards to actually taking imagery on this or recording video, it's very simple. In still mode, I'm just going to press the OK button, and it will capture a still image of the screen. Or if I press and hold and swap into video mode, if I press OK, you'll see there that it will start recording. And then if I press it again, it'll stop recording. Whilst on the main screen here as well, we can also still use that digital zoom function. We simply use the arrows either side. So I'm going to press and zoom in, and you can see that we can zoom right in up to 4 times with that main screen. This is a digital zoom, not an optical zoom, but it does allow you to get right in and look at parts on the board. And you can do this in both still and video mode as well. Now, with regards to the settings on this unit, to access this, you go into the menu here and it brings up this little bar along the top. If we scroll across, the first option is playback. So this will allow us to play back anything that we've recorded onto our SD card. If we go across again, this takes us into our image settings mode. Now under here, you have image options for things such as auto exposure, image brightness, white balance, autofocus modes, effects such as color, black, white, and negative mode, wide dynamic range mode. And then if you go into this and scroll down, there are additional options further down. So for instance, we can go right down into page 2 and you can see we got options for contrast, saturation, sharpness, and we can also mirror the screen as well. Another important one under here is the frequency settings. So depending on where you are in the world, you want to make sure you set this correctly, and this will help stop flickering on the display. Now, with regards to a couple of these features, I'm not going to go through them all, but one of the ones I did just want to show you is the effects one, because there's a nice option on this, which is called negative. So if I click on that and go into that, you will then see that the display will shift into like a filming negative mode compared to what it normally is. And it's quite handy if you want to be able to sort of look at things in a different way. It's not a mode that I use all of the time. I'm just going to turn the brightness down a little bit more. There you go. And that way you can use it to try and identify things a bit differently. I actually find it, if I refocus there, I actually find it very handy for being able to try and identify ICs. So when you're looking at them under the scope, if you get the light level right at times, so I'm just going to move it closer and focus again on it. Get the focus exactly right. It will allow us to easily identify the numbers on the IC. There you go. So if you have something that's got a coating over it, it can be quite handy for getting the identification right. You can see it there. Moving along to the next option, there we have our main settings screen. Now under this, you have the options for our shortcuts, so our photo, video, and split screen or freeze. That is the options that we had earlier. We then have our photo settings. So we've got the option to set it to 13 megapixel or 52 megapixel. We've got our video recording options, 4K 30, 1080p 60, LCD brightness, auto on and off, language settings, date and time settings, and then the information about things such as the version number and things like that. The final screen is a screen called markings. Now this allows you to turn on and off certain things on the display. So for instance, if we go into this, we can turn on a ruler on the screen, and this will put a ruler in the center of the display. This is handy for being able to measure things. If I just put my hand over the display, you can see it a little bit easier there. You can then also turn on a center mark as well if you want to with that one. Next below this, we've got line index options. So under this, we can turn on and off lines on the display. So for instance, we can go in and say, go to number 3, number 2, and what we can then is turn on show lines, and you have all of the options under this as well for adjusting the position, the line width, the line color, and things like that. And then obviously at the bottom, we've got return. Things like these line options are handy if you want to be able to check if something's straight on the screen. You could use the ruler feature if you wanted to, but again, it's just another handy feature that allows you to get more from the microscope. Now, just to demonstrate how the focus modes work on this unit. Now, at the moment, you will see that we are in manual focus mode. On the stem of the microscope, we have our buttons. So we have our autofocus button. This will trigger the autofocus when I press it. So for instance, if I just press it now, you will see on the display that autofocus has triggered and then it has locked. We then have a plus and minus, which allows us to manually adjust the focus. So if I press this, you can see we're now moving that board out of focus. And then if I press it again, we can then bring it into focus. If I then press autofocus again, it will then do the manual autofocusing and lock. You can also though press and hold this to change the focus mode, and you can now see that we've moved into fully autofocus. So if I now pick up the board and move it closer, it will automatically bring the board into focus. If I move it closer again, you will see that it will do it. And then if I move it back down, you will see that it will adjust. And it's now in this continuous autofocus mode, but what it will do is continuously try to keep the board in focus as you move it around. This is good and bad in some ways because it is constantly pulsing. So as you see there, as I move it around, it is constantly adjusting the focus. So you have the option of leaving it in this, but if you prefer, you can put it into a manual focus. So press and hold until it goes into the manual focus. You can then press it to autofocus where it is. It will lock at that point, and then when you move the board around, the focus won't change. You can also at this point set some presets. So if you want to set this position as a preset, I can simply press and hold P1. It has now saved that position as P1. If I now just move this underneath here, I'm going to autofocus onto this a minute, and I'm going to set that as P2. So now you can see, if I put this board back under, we can see it, but it's out of focus. But if I now press P1, it will go straight back to that preset focus point. And then if I go P2, it'll jump to that point earlier, which was further up. And if I put this back underneath, you can see we're back in focus there. Overall, it's fairly straightforward to use. About the only thing I will say with the autofocus is when you do have it in autofocus mode, it is constantly pulsing. It doesn't constantly do it when you don't move the board, but if you move whatever is underneath, it is constantly going to refocus and adjust to try and get it in focus. And I have found it varies in its success on depending how close you are to the device that you're looking at. So for instance, if I adjust the height of this now lower, so now I'm in closer, you can see if I move the board, it is refocusing, but it takes longer to do that focus the closer you are to the board. So again, if we look around there, if I move to there, it'll pulse and refocus back in. And it is not as quick as it is when you are further away from the subject. You can get right up and close with this microscope, but what I would suggest is when you are using it this close, you're going to be better moving into the manual focus mode and manually using the autofocus button yourself rather than allow it to do it, because if you want to move the board around like this in manual mode, it's absolutely fine. No issues at all. But if you do put it back into the autofocus, it just spends most of its time trying to figure out where it wants to be. So again, I'm going to move to there, and then you'll see as soon as I've moved it, it's gone back to adjust the focus. Move it to there, it's doing it again. Now, the final part of this video, I just want to give you an overview of what the kind of imagery looks like that you can get from the microscope. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is take a couple of stills. I'm going to use the remote controller for this because whilst this bracket is quite solid, when you touch it, there is a bit of movement, and pressing and holding the button on the front will add in a little bit of movement, and as a result of that, you won't get the clear image. So I'm going to use the remote for doing this. So I'm going to take a couple of stills, just to show you them, just to give you an idea of what this looks like. There we go. We'll take another one there. And again, that just shows you what you can do. I'm going to then do a zooming in, and we'll take some stills once we finished zooming in. There we go. We'll take the still. Next, moving on to video, I'm going to record this in 4K 30. So I'm going to hit the record button on screen. We are actually in the autofocus mode, so what I'm actually going to do before we carry on is turn that off. I'm going to keep it in the standard focus mode a minute, and then I will show you it in the autofocus. What I'm now going to do is just move around the board, give you a look at how it looks as the imagery moves, how the video looks. The colors and the overall image quality is good, although you may need to tweak the colors for your specific environment. So what I'm going to do there is just pop that IC up. I'm going to hit autofocus to allow that to refocus on the legs there, so we can see that in a bit more detail. I do notice the screen goes brown at times, although that does look a little worse on the recording on your side than it does on my side. But there, that just gives you an indication of how that looks there. I'm going to flip over to the other side of this board. I'm going to hit the autofocus again. just to give you an indication. What we'll now do is zoom in on this just to see how this looks on that 4x zoom, just so we can get in right in there and have a look at those components. It's really good for getting in and even looking at how well the legs on things have soldered. Here we go. I'll leave that there so you guys can see it. Now at this point we're about 3.5 inches from what we're looking at, so there's plenty of height at this magnification to be able to do work like soldering. I will show you with some B-roll just to give you an idea of how high we are. Now just to show you the autofocus performance at this height as I move it around, I'll just move and stop, and this will again give you an indication of what it looks like, what the pulsing is like as we move around the board. Flip it over to that side there. You can see that it is pulsing, it is trying to autofocus continuously. And again, my advice is to actually, if you're doing repair, leave it on the manual autofocus mode where you've tapped to focus. That way you're not going to have to worry about it constantly pulsing as you're moving around. Now I've moved it a lot closer. We're now about 1 inch off the top of this board, and you can see obviously we're a lot closer to the PCB. We can see things in a lot more magnification. In this autofocus mode, this gives you an idea of how it behaves, what it looks like. I will turn the autofocus mode off again in a minute just so you can see what it's like, but this does just show you the pulsing. If we now switch it to manual focus, we're now locked in on this focus, so we can easily move around the board having a look without any issues at all. Now I've moved it a lot closer. We're now about 1/2 inch above the PCB. This is about as low as I've been able to go with it before it won't start to focus. So the minimum focus distance, I don't know what it is exactly, but the bottom of it's about 1/2 inch, maybe a little bit less. But here you can just see how close in you can actually go if you did want to be able to go in and look at things very, very closely. And again, at this point, we're focused in on this pad here. We could still use the digital zoom at this point, and it is incredible just how far in we can go. We're looking there at the edge of that copper trace on the board. Here, I've swapped over to another PCB. You're looking at a motor pad on the edge of a PCB with wires going through. That's the wire there. If I just bring it back into the edge of the board there, you can see the copper that runs around the edge of the PCB. Let me just refocus it so we can get on it nicely. There we go. You can actually see the edge of the copper layer there. If I just do some manual focus in a second, just to get to the specific part I want to look at. There we go. I think we're about there. And we can now still use that digital zoom to get right in and look at the very edge of the copper there. Let me just see if we can focus it a little bit more. No, there we go. You can see we're looking at right on the edge of the copper there. If I move it along, we're now looking at the wire. That's the wire that actually goes through the PCB. And that is the other copper edge there on the other side. So again, it allows you to get in ridiculously close to whatever you want to look at. If we just try and manually focus that, no, we're definitely spot on, I think, pretty much there. That is as good as we're going to get. And if I now just zoom out, that gives you an indication right there of what we were looking at. Okay, so to share with you my thoughts on the TOMLOV microscope. Now, overall, I think this is a nice option. If you're looking for a bench scope for doing electronic repair, inspection, it's definitely worth a look. I like the fact that it has the 3 outputs. It has the option of that battery power like you've seen here. And the autofocus is a nice feature that you don't necessarily see on other models. For me, what I really like though about this is some of the additional little features like I showed you with the fact that you can have that dual zoomed in mode. That is really, really nice. It's a shame that you can only do it on the display and you can't do that on the HDMI output, but it is a nice feature that is built into this. Overall, if you're looking at getting yourself a microscope for the bench, it's definitely worth a look. There will be a link to this available in the description. Now this, as well as other TOMLOV microscopes, are available to order both on AliExpress and Amazon. On AliExpress, they have their own dedicated web store, and they do have some deals available now where you can see a whole range of different models available. This specific model is available for $241 on AliExpress, and it is also available on Amazon.com as well for $375, and you can get it for about £299 in the UK. Now, really, that's all I've got to say on this one. Hopefully you found it interesting. If you have, please do consider checking out the links to my Patreon as well as buy me a coffee. It's only through the support of my patrons I'm able to keep making content on this channel. And if you'd like to support us to allow us to make content in the future, please do consider checking it out. Now, if you have any questions, anything you want to know, please do put them down below and I will try and answer them. That's it from me on this one. Stay safe. I will speak to you soon.